Hello, I'm Andre.
And I'm Mary-Anne Rabe, and today we had the privilege of having a discussion with Brian Robinette, and we discussed his paper on contemplative practice and the therapy of mimetic desire.
Yeah, so we had the joy of meeting Brian earlier this year on a conference, the cover conference in Rome. But many years ago, we also read his book, The Grammars of Resurrection. Um, and it was such a joy to talk through how these two areas that have been so meaningful to us, mimetic theory and contemplative practice, has been so meaningful to him as well. And I think it's going to open up some very significant insights
Yeah.
for you.
So have a listen.
So it is a joy for us to welcome Brian Robinette. He's professor of theology at Boston College.
Mhm.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. It's very, very good to be with you.
And do
Do we
we?
pronounce your name correctly, Robinette?
Yeah, Robinette is correct.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Brian, before we get into the discussion further, with these two ideas that have greatly influenced us in our work, I'd love for you to share what has been the influence of these ideas on
The
your walk and your life
contemplation and
and the
mimetic,
mimetic
yeah, desire.
Yeah,
desire.
sure. Um, well, let me start by saying that when I was a teenager, sort
Mm,
of older teenager, I was experimenting a bit with various kinds of meditation practices.
Yeah.
And when I went to college, I was experiencing a very significant crisis, you might say, of meaning, of direction in life. And long story short, managed to come across various writings introducing readers to contemplative practice.
Mm.
mhm.
It ranged, for me, it was quite eclectic. It ranged from some Christian authors to also authors um, giving account of Zen Buddhist practice, for instance,
Yeah.
or uh, in some cases, Advaita Vedanta out of the Hindu tradition. So I began to really experiment with my own capacity for attention,
Hmm.
became curious about what is attention, where does it come from, how do I attend to things in such a way as to open up possibilities and including possibilities that are free from some of the clamor in my
Mm.
own mind.
Yes.
So for years, I've been committed to meditation practice. I would eventually settle into a Christian contemplative practice. And that was a result of both a discovery process of certain forms of contemplative practice, but also a enchantment essentially with the Christian tradition
Mhm.
that I had grown up in, but had become disaffected
Mm.
with for a period of time. And so it was really the mystical tradition within Christianity that created a sort of groove for me, a way of life, and
Mhm.
became a source of intellectual aspiration too, because I wanted to know more about this tradition, how it was situated within the intellectual tradition, the institution of
Mhm.
Christianity, the various institutions of Christianity, and also various forms of ritual practice, liturgical practice, worship,
Okay.
et cetera, et
So,
cetera. So that became a kind of a theological
yeah.
passion for me. So that's the one way to start. Andre, though, you wanted to follow up?
Yes. So your interest in contemplative meditative practices began kind of before your interest in mimetic theory and
Yeah.
mimetic desire as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, very, very much so. Although, in a way, I think that there were certain aspects of my background that set me up to be especially attentive to mimetic theory when I came across it. Not
Yeah.
Mm,
only just because all of us are mimetic by nature,
Mhm.
so
mm,
there would be plenty of material for that. All of us, when I think read this material, find ourselves implicated in it. It's a very
mhm.
self-implicating kind of discovery.
Yeah.
But I'd also experienced a rather rupturous exit from the more conservative isn't even the right word, somewhat more fundamentalist
Mm.
kind of background,
Yeah.
experienced being excluded essentially or ostracized from a community as a youth as a result of my various involvements, including in the world of music,
Yes.
um, dance, and things of
Yeah.
that sort. So, but anyway, it wouldn't be until I was in graduate school
Hmm.
when I would come across anything related to mimetic theory.
Yeah.
And so I went to Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee, originally as a musician, and then while I was there,
Wow.
became more interested in philosophy and eventually religious studies. And then I would go on to study theology at college at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, and then to do doctoral studies at Notre Dame. And it was, I think, the first year when I was doing doctoral studies that I came across the work of James Allison.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah.
And I can't really recall the how his book got into my hands, but it was relatively newly published
Mm-hmm.
at that time. So I was at Notre Dame from years 98 to 2003. And it was an astonishing book for me. It
It is.
was really an extraordinary book. And while I would not study much in depth mimetic theory while in my PhD program, I had it sort of as
Mm.
a kind of intellectual hobby and a spiritual
Yes.
hobby, if you want to put it that way,
Yeah.
during my time, and then really became immersed in that after my doctoral studies and when I was first a professor at St. Louis
Okay.
University.
So I found it so interesting. We only found out that you brought these two ideas of mimetic theory and contemplative practice together when we saw you earlier this year and heard your presentation at the cover conference in Rome. Before that, we enjoyed your book, The Grammars of
Mm.
Resurrection.
Thank you.
Years ago, we read that, so we were aware of um, uh, your studies with mimetic theory. And so,
Hmm.
what really interested us is on our journey. I would say we practiced forms of meditation, but it was more the discursive kind
Practice.
of meditation for many years,
Hmm.
and then probably around about more than
That's 10 years ago.
maybe, yeah, 12 years ago or so, we started enjoying Rene Girard's work. And it was only a few years after immersing ourselves in mimetic theory that centering prayer, practices of silence, and those things became so relevant to us. And we kind of combined these two areas in our own way. We've got the online school, and they seem to just flow together so beautifully. And
Hmm.
one thing that you mention in your article is the fact that very often mimetic theory is presented on a very theoretical way. And certainly that's how I began. I found some very useful ideas. It illuminated some perspectives in theology, and it was very much a theoretical, theological
Hmm.
perspective. And then I think what happens to so many of us, the the gaze is inverted. And there comes that moment where you see yourself implicated in what you are trying to communicate.
I think most people also identify with the scapegoating of mimetic theory, and then suddenly you realize you're looking at the scapegoats, and when the gaze is inverted and you realize that you are implicated in this,
Yes.
is when
Yes.
you really begin to
Yeah.
understand what it
Yes.
means. Yeah.
And so eventually those two areas where and you beautifully develop that thought in your paper that we need to move from mimetic theory just being a theoretical practice into the aim being a conversion, being a very personal experience, and how those aspects then harmonize with contemplative practices.
Yes,
For you to take that thought further.
I'd be very happy to. So I think you're right. Yeah, there's something very intuitive about the conjunction of these um, influences, you might say. For one thing, one of the experiences that a lot of people have when they engage mimetic theory is a sense of a new sense of perception. So it is a theoretical, it's an insight that wakes a person up to various kinds of movements of desire that they were previously not very conscious of. So there's something inherent about mimetic theory that allows us to perceive things that are usually obscure. Now, that doesn't automatically mean that we therefore live differently, but it can. It can have something like there's a distancing effect. You say, "Oh, I see how I am moved in such a way. I see why I desire such and such. Do I really desire that? What does it mean to desire that? Who are the models in my life, or what are the various ways in which I am caught up in mechanisms of self-defense and projection with others?" So, as I say, it's sort of an awakening process that I think is key to it. And Girard describes this experience himself. I mean, early on, that's what he said that the novelists discovered. The great novelist or novelistic truth was that through exploration of how characters desire, usually, of course, according to the desires of others and all the various entanglements that come with that, the novelists themselves come to have a new perception of themselves. Wait a minute, I am also drawn or led in such a way. So there's a kind of a cognitive space that the theory can actually open up to help us to make our behaviors more intelligible. Now, this would presumably be much enhanced if we had various kinds of practices associated with it. And certainly Christian tradition and other traditions have them. Liturgical practice is one of them. Scriptural meditation is another. Prayer, of course, is another. Ascetical practices like fasting or vigils or certain kinds of curbing of desire help us to become free from, you might say, the nose rings of mimetic desire and the way in which it's so often grasping and acquisitive. But meditation or contemplative practice is, I think, unique in this regard as a practice. And one of the reasons why is because the very nature of contemplative practice is to discover a capacity of awareness or a depth of inner stillness or silence that is not caught up in the various kinds of psychodrama that usually, move us around and keep us in reactive stances all the time. We can actually notice, observe our hearts and minds flowing with all kinds of emotional and ideational content in which we are usually engorged. We're usually just simply submerged with it. And so a meditation practice doesn't instantly make one, free from all of these things, but it gives us a certain kind of spacious relationship to them so that it's not so compulsive in us, because most human behavior is compulsive. And, so this comes through, I think, for people who engage it with a certain kind of insight, of course, which has a cognitive element. You go, oh, wow, all of this is happening within me, and I'm not usually noticing it, but yet absorbed in it and run by it. And then there is also, I think, an affective response, which is a kind of relief
Mhm.
because there's a burden or a contracted sense of self that is usually associated with all of this mimetic compression.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you go, wait a minute, I am not simply the sum
Yeah.
of these various impulses, thought patterns, memories, anxieties, have formed thoughts that are coursing through me, but there is a deeper capacity of awareness
Yeah.
that it illuminates all of that, but yet is free from it. What if I actually became more acquainted with that and lived my life from there?
Yes. Yes.
That, in conjunction with the really stunning insights of mimetic theory, the conjunction of those two
Yeah.
seemed to me, when I first thought about this in the context of my own life, to be almost an obvious connection.
Yes.
Of course,
Yes.
there's something that I think mimetic theory provides in certain in terms of certain kinds of insights that are hard won
Yes.
intellectually, and so they're valuable. But those brought into a more non-discursive practice,
Yes.
which isn't so much about thinking about these things, but
But
discovering a
an
capacity that is
awareness.
inherently free from them.
Yeah. I remember on my own journey with it, how that started happening. So, Gerard chose the word mimetic because he wanted to emphasize this unconscious way in which desire is imitated.
Yes.
And it must have been after immersing myself in these ideas, teaching them, conversing about them for about, I would say, 2 years, that I think what happened is this new level of awareness that you're speaking about, where I began to realize that the very way in which I perceived myself was starting to change, that
Yeah.
I became aware of the fact that these desires that I thought were my own, suddenly other people are involved in this process of creating me. And that wasn't a very,
Encouraging.
that wasn't a very comforting idea to start considering, well, who's busy creating me?
Yeah.
And so my first reaction, and it wasn't a theoretical or reasonable reaction, it was just an experiential, emotional reaction, is I don't want just anybody to create me. I don't just want to reflect all these desires. And I can see how that mimetic insight then so beautifully flows with this contemplative practice, because what slowly started to happen is this person that was totally immersed in the process of reflecting the world and the relationships I was in started to pull apart, and the distance was being created between who I am and the desires and the thoughts that are constantly animating me. And
Yes.
this is precisely what happens in contemplative practice, is trying to, through just a receptiveness. So I've used the word trying to, but I guess that is what you don't want to try to do. You're not trying to do anything,
Hopeful, but willing.
you're creating a space in which you can become more aware, but there's a difference between all the thoughts and the desires that constantly flows in and out of who you are, and this observer. And that space allows possibilities in that would normally not be there. I love the two areas that you highlight in the paper as well, the practice of silence, and then the practice of watchfulness, which is this life that is now an active life, but not a reactive life. I
Yes.
love that description. Yeah.
Yes. Well, what you describe is, I mean, so beautifully is, I think, part of some of the classic itineraries of contemplative practice where there's a kind of a disillusionment that
Mm.
occurs and maybe even a painful purgation. But
Mm.
it does come as a shock
Yes.
to come to the recognition, wait a minute, what if I'm just simply the constellation of various kinds of desires and processes
Yes.
over which I thought I had control and or assumed that I was author of.
Mm.
That it can be a disheartening recognition. It can
Yes.
actually send people into a pit of despair.
Mm-hmm.
There's something very close to that recognition and a kind of nihilistic sort of vision that maybe this is all there really is.
Yes.
I actually struggled with that for years,
Mm.
and I would sort of, flip back and forth between, on the one hand, this sense of exhilaration of perceiving all of these phenomena converging together to co-constitute who I am, and sensing a kind of a participation. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's almost like an expansive sense of one's being in the
Yes.
world when you recognize that, and then the confines, sort of the ego, if you want to put it this way, sort of the
Yeah.
egoic construction, which is a confinement in a way, can be popped.
Yeah.
It's like a soap
Yes.
bubble. You just go, oh, okay. On the
Yeah.
other hand, it can lead to a sense of, but potentially anyway, despair or
Mhm.
deflation.
Yes.
Because then you think, well, if this is this all there is? If is this
Mm.
all I am?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's possible to see so many people, including yourself, run by
Mm-hmm.
patterns,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and it can lead to almost like a deterministic sense of human beings. Like, are we
Yeah.
really free?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's been a long-standing existential question for me since my late teens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but that I think that is why having a certain wisdom tradition is so
Mm.
important, because if you're kind of doing this on your own and you experience some of the confounding elements of certain realizations, you can fall into certain kinds of reactive patterns,
Mhm.
a bit of despair, a lack of motivation or inner energy. You can lose desire, you can lose heart,
Yes.
essentially.
And
And so within the
that is such a, I need to interrupt you because
please.
we for many years in going into places and teaching mimetic theory, we had to develop the skill to know that if people really understand this, then that's going to be one of the
Yeah.
responses.
Yes.
And that's not really a marketable teaching profession that
It's very popular.
yeah. So we had to acknowledge that,
Mhm.
recognize that, and say, well, that is one of the signs that people are truly grasping what's happening here.
Yeah.
And then to say, but that's not the end of the story.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Yes.
a necessary part of this path
Mhm.
to take us further. Yeah.
Indeed. I teach mimetic theory, or teach
Yeah.
with it often, to undergraduates, and that experience is something I'm quite aware of.
Yeah.
Where, okay, you explore these things, and it can lead to certain crises. I'm not trying to
Mm.
provoke crisis in students necessarily, but
Yes.
some crises are worth having,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and especially if it concerns the truth.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but you're right. There has to be a kind of generosity of heart
Mm.
and a faith and a hope
Mhm.
within the midst of that, um, to help people with that insight and to be helped with that insight for yourself. Now, I think the wisdom of a kind of death and resurrection,
Yes.
it's sort of like, oh yeah, well, of course, there is a kind of dying to self and a
Mm.
reconstitution of the
Mhm.
self, and
Yeah.
so it's in the, if you like, the deep structures of the DNA of
Yeah.
Christian faith
Yeah.
to provide certain kinds of itineraries and symbols, rites,
Mhm.
communities that are shaped by this sort of flow and can communicate certain kinds of skills and dispositions and hold
Yeah.
that within communal context.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's really, really important. But I think the not the end of it, but after a period of a kind of disillusionment, if one kind of tarries with it,
Mhm.
Yes.
and contemplative practice really is that. It's not about, I mean, sometimes there are amazing experiences, but one doesn't really go into such practice for that.
No.
If so, you will pretty soon be disappointed and probably stop
Yes.
and
Yeah.
quit.
Yeah.
Um, that there's a certain threshold underneath or beyond which one must pass, and
Mhm.
Mm.
that is a discovery, as I say, of a deep and abiding peace,
Mm.
which is not manufactured.
Mhm.
It's not confabulated.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not a mere projection. It's discoverable in a with a kind of letting it be
Yeah.
and present itself, the peace that passes
Understand.
understanding,
Mhm.
and to a profound trust
Mhm.
in that.
Mhm.
And oh wait, okay, I can actually fall apart, entirely fall apart in that, and actually be safe,
Yes.
have a sense of abiding peace,
Mhm.
have a sense of luminosity and a very simple joy,
Yeah.
a kind of a growing in a detachment, a healthy detachment. There
Yes.
are so
Yes.
many unhealthy forms of detachment, of course, but like an indifference, a creative indifference that certain things, maybe a lot of things, really don't matter,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and the way that I thought previously.
Yeah.
And
I,
yeah, please.
no, I absolutely also loved the illustration that you gave at the conference where you spoke about this, creating this kind of spaciousness
Hmm.
as the unclenching of the inner fist.
Yes.
And it's just really stayed with me, even going through the paper in terms of it's such a perfect picture of like that number one, that acquisitive desire that we don't even realize that it's so
Mhm.
part of our identities.
Hmm.
And then again, that conflictual desire where it's, everything within us, these identities that are formed constantly by the other and by, yeah, conflict of against, and where there's that letting go, unclenching of that, creating the spaciousness for a creative desire, where you
Hmm.
spoke of, when we fall into this abyss, it is into the very ground of our being that we are
Yes.
held, and this absolute generosity of God that is given to us, in which we are opening up to. So it's not an opening up into just a nothing or a fighting of desire,
Hmm.
but it's a letting go. It's a willingness to consent.
That's beautifully put. I think that's right. I think once the transition, and it's not final, it's not definitive, there are
Mm.
oscillations and
Yes.
further things, but once there is, I think there is a moment or a series of moments when it becomes more established in us
Mm.
uh, that this is the ground of my being,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that it's utterly trustworthy,
Mm.
Yeah.
um, and is not alien to me at all. I'm inseparable from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the from which of my very life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had been maybe trying to seal myself off from it, or, it's being obscured in my life in various ways because I am, as you say, kind of clenching or constantly comparing myself. with others and grasping at various forms of identity that are always elusive and very often, I mean, sometimes they can bear truth. I mean, certain kinds of roles that we have or aspirations, of course, those can mediate all kinds of goodness, but so often they come with various forms of illusionment or desperation or grasping. We can return to all of that and indeed should return to all of that, but from this inner ground,
Yes.
rather than assuming that we have to try to acquire a sense of well-being or worth by
Yes.
attachment to those
Yeah.
relationships or other persons or identities.
I think that one thing that we've often noticed is a way in which people try to battle this reflective mimetic desire is to develop this sense of an independent self that is not mimetic,
Different, yeah.
and to actually come to peace with the fact that we are always relational beings. We are made from relationship. The solution is not the kind of detachment where nothing influences me or I have no relationships, but rather I think the way in which you beautifully explore that thought of detachment in your paper as well, it goes hand in hand with being non-judgmental,
Yeah.
being able to kind of view, and this happens both in the mimetic practice, but also in the contemplative practice, where I can now view my thoughts, I can view these various desires coming and going, but I don't need commentary on them.
Yes.
I don't
Right.
need to constantly judge, is this right or wrong? And practically, that has helped me a lot, because I think
Yeah.
many of us would find ourselves in situations where a certain relationship will evoke a very predictable emotional response.
Mhm.
But I know that if I'm with this person and this happens, this is how I want to reflect that. And there was one specific relationship in my life where I started realizing if I can just allow that same kind of space that I allow within the contemplative practice, that moment in which I don't react,
Mhm.
but in a sense, I detach myself from what would usually just evoke this reaction, and for a moment create this space for other possibilities and options to come in. And what was really helpful for me in that specific relationship is to observe my emotion in it and not to judge it. To say,
Yes.
okay, this is how I feel about this. And normally I would just want to react out of that emotion.
Mhm.
But I can now just observe that emotion, not judge it, not feel guilty about it or self-justified in my emotion,
Mhm.
but just observe it. And then when you can react, it is so much better
Yeah.
than that reactive way of living. So
You
that
open yourself up to possibilities rather
yes.
than just,
Yes.
yeah.
So that's for me a beautiful description of the kind of detachment. And you use the example of the woman caught in the act of adultery. But if you want to go to something else,
And there were just so many beautiful things that I wanted to just bring out, but just while we were on detachment, if you don't mind me reading from your
Not at
paper.
all. Thank you. Yeah, of course.
Um, it is rather the slow discovery of an awareness that is immeasurably deeper and far more capacious than the discursive activities we ordinarily preoccupy our attention with and seem sufficient in representing reality to us. We are perpetually seduced into believing that our affective registrations and conceptual representations of phenomena capture their reality, whether ourselves, other persons, or God. Without being anti-intellectual, contemplative practice unsettles our tenacious grip on things by opening us up to a more fundamental awareness, an abyss of awareness that is always there, but we scarcely notice it. We do not cling to this or that content of awareness when we pray thusly, but we abide within the very ground of awareness with simplicity of attention. Preserve a loving attentiveness to God with no desire to feel or understand any particular thing concerning Him, writes St. John of the Cross, in simple summary of a practice that, when cultivated over time, slowly takes root. Just so profound.
We had a discussion with some of our online students.
Actually, yesterday. Hey?
Yeah, yesterday, and that question often comes up of what is this awareness supposed to feel like? What is this experience supposed to be? And that was so helpful, this kind of loving attention that doesn't give a predefined expectation of it has to be ecstatic or it has to be this, but it's that letting go. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, in the same way that often and it's understandable, I don't think we should condemn ourselves for doing so, but we often come to prayer looking for certain kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
And like I say, there's nothing wrong with that. We want to be consoled. We want to find joy. We want to, that's all fine and good. But contemplative practice or contemplative prayer lets go of even those expectations.
Yeah.
And, isn't attempting even in very subtle ways to bargain with God, buy this and you that. And just really allowing God to be God.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I think you said allowing God to happen.
Yes, allowing God to happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so while there's no guarantee of an experience, if you like, of peace, actually though, with some seasons of practice,
Yes.
it becomes so obvious. It's just there. It's there. It's always there. It's always been there. It's utterly reliable. But I'm usually off and away, prodigally out and about, searching for it in all the wrong places, as the old country song goes. One of the things that you're bringing up about this, which I think is nice to connect with mimetic theory, is that when we have, let's say, become more established by this presence and found ourselves more and more in it, on the one hand, we also discover, I think it's appropriate to use this language, a more genuine and authentic personhood or self. So I don't think that we need to abandon language of self at all. Some traditions do that. I don't think. I think that there's an appropriate place for understanding persons as selves, as subjects, as having inviolable worth and dignity and unrepeatable. So genuinely unique and miraculously so. Unlike, but also like everybody else.
Yes.
And so discovering that and growing in a kind of confidence from there can also mediate that to other people. And so, Andre, when you're referring to how, let's say, a particular person who might induce certain reactive patterns in us, to be able to observe that and to not judge those patterns within oneself, which is in a way also of disassociating how you feel about such a person and the person, him or herself. It's like normally we identify our reactions with the persons themselves. They are my thought about them. They are my reaction about them. And that's kind of all that they are. And so there's a kind of non-judgmentalism that allows the person to be the person they are and not the person you just simply are projecting them to be, or the one that you're reacting to, usually because you're reacting to your own stuff, within you. So, but if you can actually, be in presence with other people like that, it's disarming for them very often.
Mm-hmm.
They might not be conscious of it, but you might notice that they're sort of like relaxing a little bit. Maybe their
Mm-hmm.
defenses are down. You're
Yes.
modeling pacific desire uh,
Yes.
to them by not trying to say, "Oh, I am modeling something for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm your, teacher or your model." It's just that the kind of the presence, you might
Yeah.
say, that is that you are, and that is being present in and through you, is opening them up at usually a
Yes.
pre-conscious level.
Yeah.
So there's
That
an
is.
affective resonance that's happening.
Yes.
Yes.
I think there's a base. One of the things about mimetic theory that I like, of course, is it talks a lot about desire and how
Mm-hmm.
important desire really is to human beings, and we tend to overestimate thinking and
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
conceptual mind. I think that's true, but there's also, I think, a base of affectivity,
Mm-hmm.
how people feel
Yeah.
without even knowing that they're feeling it
Mm.
that way. But how
Mm.
do people feel? Do
Yeah.
they feel safe? Do they feel welcome? Do they
Mhm.
feel at ease?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people who have themselves been disarmed, kind of unwound a little bit through
Yeah.
Yeah.
various kinds of practices that have a therapeutic aspect to them. I don't
Yeah.
mean that
Yeah.
in a superficial sense. I mean in a deep sense, like a therapy of
Absolutely.
desire, like a
Mhm.
kind of an
Yeah.
unwinding of desire allows for an affective resonance that's different,
Yeah.
Yes.
um, for other people.
I
Mm-hmm.
just was reminded as you were saying that of a quote of Thomas Merton that the beginning of love is to let those we love be perfectly themselves and
Mm,
not to twist them to fit our own image. Otherwise, we love only the reflection of ourselves we find in them.
Yeah.
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 So beautiful. So if I had to just from remembering what I read, try and kind of summarize the way in which mimetic desire therapy and contemplative practices can mutually inform and enrich one another. The first thing I think of is both introduces us to a new kind of awareness. I think mimetic theory is slowly trying to bring some of the things that usually happen on a completely unconscious level,
Hmm.
bring that
Consciousness.
into a conscious level. We're never going to bring everything unconscious into
Mm.
consciousness, and that's not the goal. But there's
Exactly.
at least some areas of process that I now become aware of.
Yeah.
Um, the same obviously happens within our contemplative practices. And I think it's got to do with that creation of distance, that we somehow find a perspective in which we can view all these processes and not be totally enmeshed
Mhm.
in them
Yes.
without knowing that that's us. And then I think the second aspect we spoke about, and they all intertwined, but is this idea of this detachment. Um, both of them helps us create a bit of distance between who we are and what we are desiring, what we are thinking. But I think that distance is not just cognitive. I think it's actual real distance that happens in time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That we're no longer living in this reactive mode, constantly just ready to speak. That was another beautiful thing that we discussed yesterday. One of the students were speaking about how they were always ready to answer
Mhm.
before they've actually listened.
Hmm.
And I think this is part of that watchfulness that starts happening both through being more aware of your
Mhm.
own process, being more contemplative in your responses. I can now actually give the other person my full attention and presence without having to already work on the answer and the response. I can just be present.
And
So
it's the greatest gift we could give to anyone.
It
yeah,
is.
You pay attention.
present. So
It's it's a way of loving.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so beautiful harmony between contemplative practice and desire there. Did I miss any areas that you highlighted?
No,
But,
it's so wonderfully stated. Maybe one thing that we all might add
mm,
to it is this detachment, sort of distinguishing between healthy and unhealthy forms of detachment.
mhm,
Really, I think one of the key indicators of the difference is that healthy detachment leads very naturally, spontaneously to loving
mm,
and to compassion.
Yeah.
It's really one of the things that's so stunning when if you recognize how if I recognize how often I am run by patterns
mhm,
and submerged in various kinds of you know affective content, from memories, hang-ups,
yeah,
so that this so often runs me. If I come into a near or actual immediate insight into that happening in me, chances are that I'm much more likely to see that in other people as well.
mhm,
And that could lead some to a kind of misanthropic view. Like, aren't we all just sort of run by patterns and, like robots and,
mhm,
or, puppets or something, puppets of
yeah,
desire? And isn't that sad and tragic?
mm,
Well, okay, that could be a view we have. I think actually, though, the more mature view and the experience, if we tarry with the insight, is that it will help us to more spontaneously love one another because we will see that we are all bound with one another. We're related to one another.
yeah,
That we all seek freedom, that we all seek to be loved and
mhm,
to love. That this is the deepest need we actually have,
yeah,
is to be recognized, valued, seen through the eyes of others
yeah,
as worthy of love.
yeah,
Part of the tragedy of that is that, no human being could ever provide. I know tragedy is too wrong, too overstated,
Strong.
but
Yeah.
other human beings will never be able to provide for us that
mm,
unqualified love because we're finite. We have, limitations. We'll die,
mm,
so, but we have to discover an unconditional love, which comes only
yes,
from God.
yeah,
And this detachment allows us to experience being loved or being worthy of love within our very being,
yes,
which then allows us to more spontaneously love others
yeah,
rather than on the basis of certain kinds of stated or unstated
yeah.
negotiations. I love you if this, or I love you
Yes.
if that.
Because if you, as you say, tarry within the practice, you eventually come to that place where you recognize that there's this much deeper reality about me where what and who I am becomes difficult to distinguish from the God who supports my very being, that at the
Yeah.
very depth of who I am, there is something more than the forms and the shapes and the desires and the thoughts that I usually identify with.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most profound things that happens there is if I recognize God as the ground of my being, I cannot but recognize God as the ground of your being and of
Exactly.
everything. And that these representations and these masks hide something more true, more beautiful, more
Hmm?
valuable than what is often visible.
Yes.
So yeah, I can see how that then evokes or inspires this kind of love, because I might see in you more than what you see in yourself.
Yes.
And this is what kind of inspires as you say, that kind of where you meet the same person where there might have been conflict
Yes.
before.
Hmm.
Just the fact that you can see something that you haven't seen before changes the nature of that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people feel that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
They
They
know that.
do.
Hmm.
And what a gift to impart to another. Not that one assigns oneself the task of going around and giving gifts. Here I'm giving you a gift, and here I'm giving.
Yeah.
It's a more spontaneous to recognize and to appreciate other people, and they
Yes.
sense that it opens
Yeah.
them up,
Yeah.
and allows for a certain kind of relation that was not otherwise possible.
Mm.
So anyway, that active part of detachment it's
Mm.
like a detachment allowing for a spontaneous flow of loving compassion
Yes.
Yeah.
for other people and for oneself, one's
Yeah.
own, life and all that, makes it up, and the
Mm.
relationships
Yeah.
that make it
What
up.
a privilege to have these tools
Yeah.
to be able to explore these depths. And I was just reminded that we've spoken now about your paper. Where can people get hold of,
I'll
or
get the link to it. I think
is
you
that
had it
okay
in
if we
your.
share?
I think it was on your academia or somewhere you have
Sure.
the paper there.
Yeah.
So I'll put the link in the video
I'll be
today.
happy. I can also send that to you by
Thank,
email.
thank you.
And and of course there are other, if at any point we want to have further conversation about
Mm.
other kinds of texts or authors
Mhm.
who, if not
Yes.
always working with exactly the same insights, are very close and it can
Yeah.
be helpful or inspiring, for others, that would be, very welcome.
I know this is going to be very helpful to many people.
Yeah.
In one of our previous courses, we had an introduction to mimetic theory in one course. It was kind of a month-long course, and then the next month was this practice of silence. And we try to explain why we think they complement one another so well, but you've put words to what we intuitively knew would happen by combining these two. So that's been very useful. Thank
Well,
you.
and thank you for doing that, because I don't know too many people who are doing
Hmm.
what you're doing. In fact, um, but the moment that people who are familiar with one and the other see the relationship,
Yes,
it like,
makes perfect
Yeah.
it
sense.
clicks with people.
They
Like, of
fit
course,
together.
Yes.
yeah. But I would very much enjoy learning more about how you do what you do.
Okay.
It would be relevant to me in all sorts of ways, not least in the classroom, because, as I say, not all of my classes are about this, but some of my classes will
Yes.
combine
Mhm.
contemplative practice of some sort and mimetic theory. And honestly, I can't think of any thing that I introduce to young people in the classroom that does more to
Hmm.
see themselves implicated in the material than those two.
Mm.
Yes.
And the fact that they can be conjoined in some way
Yeah.
is, I think, a project for us to work on and to
Yeah.
work on
Absolutely.
together.
Well, thank you
Uh,
so much for your ongoing work. It's so, so important.
Likewise, thank you very much for your ongoing work as well.
yes. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.